At the edge of the world, where the sun vanishes for months and the wind carves monuments from ice, a people rose in defiance of nature's silence. This is the land of the Inuit, where breath turns to crystal and every step writes history across the snow. Here, survival is not a struggle, but a skill, passed from hand to hand like fire. They read the sky like scripture, track caribou across blizzards, and build warmth from nothing but snow and knowing. Their world is a frozen cathedral, lit by the aurora's slow dance, a place where children are taught to listen to wind, respect the seal, and remember the names of ice. This is not a tale of conquest, but of harmony. A civilization shaped by cold, guided by stars, and alive with ancient rhythm. Ice cracks like thunder beneath the feet of a lone hunter, his obsidian blade catching the pale light of a northern sun that never sets. Somewhere beyond the endless white expanse, mammoths trumpet their ancient calls, while saber-toothed cats prowl the tundra's edge. The year stretches toward 3000 BC, and humanity has discovered the roof of the world, a realm where existence demands more than courage, where every breath crystallizes into memory, and where the first peoples learn to read the language of wind and frost. From the steppes of Siberia, nomadic bands push eastward across landscapes that defy comprehension. These are not the farmers who build mud brick cities beside fertile rivers, nor the herders who drive cattle through Mediterranean valleys. These wanderers follow caribou migrations that span continents, their entire existence synchronized to rhythms older than human memory. When winter locks the land in darkness for months at a stretch, they wait. When summer brings endless daylight and clouds of mosquitoes, they move. Stone tools scatter across campsites like breadcrumbs marking humanity's path into the unknown. At Bluefish Caves in what will become the Yukon, hunters work mammoth bone into weapons that can penetrate the thick hides of Ice Age giants. Their camps smell of rendered fat and singed fur, while children learn to knap flint by watching fingers that move with unconscious precision. Every chip of stone tells a story of adaptation, each broken blade marking another step toward mastery over an environment that kills the unprepared. Microblades revolutionized northern existence in ways that seem almost miraculous to modern understanding. Where southern populations struggle with heavy stone axes that shatter in cold, these wanderers create razor-sharp slivers no longer than a fingernail. 10 microblades can be fashioned from the stone required for a single conventional tool. They slot into bone handles like surgical instruments, creating composite weapons that combine lightness with devastating effectiveness. A single hunter can carry enough spare blades to last an entire season, while his southern counterparts labor under burdens that would cripple polar travel. The younger Dryas strikes like a cosmic punishment, dropping global temperatures until even temperate regions freeze. Palm trees die in Egypt, while glaciers advance across Europe with the inexorability of divine judgment. Yet in the far north, where cold has always ruled, the peoples who learn to extract life from ice barely notice the change. Their fires burn seal oil instead of wood. Their clothing traps body heat with efficiency that European nobles will not achieve for millennia. Their food stores consist of fat that never spoils in permafrost storage. While southern civilizations collapse under the weight of climate catastrophe, these wanderers expand their range. They push beyond the tree line into territories where no human has ever walked, following animal paths that lead deeper into realms of perpetual winter. Behind them, forests retreat and grasslands die, but ahead lies the endless northern archipelago, a maze of islands and channels where seals birth their young and walrus gather in herds that blacken coastal ice. Small boats hug the ice edge like insects navigating the margin between existence and void. These vessels, constructed from driftwood and animal hide, represent maritime innovation that will remain virtually unchanged for 5,000 years. Their builders understand hydrodynamics through experience rather than theory, crafting hulls that flex with waves instead of fighting them. In storms that would sink larger ships, these kayaks dance across swells while their occupants read wind patterns in the behavior of seabirds. Families become the fundamental units of existence, bound together by dependencies that transcend affection. A hunter cannot survive alone. He needs a woman to prepare his clothing, cure his meat, and birth the children who will care for him in age. A woman cannot thrive alone. She needs a hunter to provide the raw materials for life and protection from the predators that rule polar nights. Children become economic assets before they learn to walk, their small fingers perfect for threading sinew through needle holes that adult hands cannot manage. The Arctic small tool tradition emerges as these scattered bands develop implements perfectly adapted to their harsh conditions. Tools shrink to minimal size and maximum efficiency. Every ounce of weight matters when existence depends on mobility. Sewing needles carved from bird bone enable the creation of waterproof clothing that means the difference between life and death in polar waters. Fish hooks fashioned from walrus ivory catch food that supplements the uncertain results of game pursuit. Scrapers shaped from flint prepare hides with precision that turns raw animal skin into flexible, weatherproof material. Settlements rise and fall with seasonal rhythms that govern all northern life. Summer camps spread along river mouths, where salmon run silver thick through shallow water. Women gather eggs from bird colonies, while men pursue caribou that migrate in herds spanning horizons. Children play games that teach tracking skills, while elders repair tools and share knowledge accumulated across decades of polar existence. When autumn brings the first hint of returning winter, entire communities vanish like mirages, their members scattered to winter camps positioned near resources that will sustain them through months of darkness. Spiritual practices develop that recognize the animate essence dwelling within every element of the polar environment. The bear that provides meat and fur possesses a spirit that must be propitiated through proper ritual. The seal that offers oil for lamps carries consciousness that requires respectful treatment of its remains. Even stones and ice flows contain forces that can aid or hinder human endeavors depending on how they are approached. Shamans emerge who specialize in maintaining harmony between human needs and the spiritual powers that control northern existence. Art appears in forms that serve practical as well as aesthetic purposes. Carved ivory figures ensure game pursuit success by embodying the animals they represent. Decorated tools transform utilitarian objects into expressions of cultural identity. Tattoos mark achievements and spiritual protections, while clothing designs encode information about family lineages and regional affiliations. Beauty becomes inseparable from function in a world where waste equals death. Trade networks span impossible distances, connecting northern communities across thousands of miles of ice and tundra. Jade from Alaska appears in camps beside Hudson Bay, while meteoric iron from Greenland reaches settlements along the Siberian coast. These exchange systems move more than goods. They carry ideas, innovations, and genetic diversity that prevent isolated populations from stagnating. A new style of harpoon head, developed in one region, spreads throughout the north within generations, while innovations in clothing design propagate along routes that follow game migrations and seasonal gatherings. Languages diverge as groups adapt their communication to local conditions and available resources. Vocabularies develop that contain dozens of words for different types of snow and ice, each term encoding crucial knowledge for existence. Grammar structures reflect the cognitive patterns necessary for polar life, with tense systems that emphasize the relationship between human actions and natural cycles. Stories preserve navigational information in narrative form, encoding star positions, landmark relationships, and seasonal indicators in tales that entertain while they educate. Mastery over harsh conditions reaches levels that border on the supernatural. These experts learn to predict weather changes from the behavior of animals and the quality of light. They read ice conditions through subtle differences in sound and color that reveal safe routes across treacherous surfaces. They navigate by stars invisible to southern eyes, following celestial paths that guide them across trackless wilderness with accuracy that will not be matched until the invention of satellite navigation. Their understanding of ecology enables them to extract maximum resources from landscapes that appear barren to outsider observation. Social structures emerge that balance individual autonomy with collective needs. Leaders achieve authority through demonstrated competence rather than inherited status, their influence lasting only as long as their decisions prove successful. Conflicts resolve through contests that test practical skills, with disputes over territories settled by competitions that determine who can best utilize contested resources. Cooperation becomes mandatory for existence, yet personal independence remains the highest cultural value. Gender roles develop along lines dictated by physical differences and environmental demands. Men specialize in pursuing large marine mammals, a task that requires upper body strength and willingness to risk death in dangerous waters. Women master the complex arts of clothing production, food preparation, and child rearing that make polar life possible. Children of both sexes learn all necessary skills regardless of gender, since emergencies may require anyone to perform any task necessary for group persistence. Seasonal celebrations mark crucial transitions in the northern year. The return of the sun after months of darkness calls forth ceremonies that welcome light back to the world. The first appearance of migrating animals triggers rituals that ensure game pursuit success and honor the spirits of creatures that give their lives for human existence. The onset of winter darkness brings communities together for storytelling marathons that preserve cultural knowledge and strengthen social bonds during the most dangerous season. Death customs reflect beliefs about the relationship between physical existence and spiritual reality. Bodies receive careful preparation that honors the deceased while protecting the living from potentially dangerous spirits. Grave goods include tools and food that will serve the dead in their journey to otherworldly realms. Mourning practices help survivors process grief while maintaining the practical focus necessary for continued existence in unforgiving conditions. Across the north, from Alaska to Greenland, the pre-Dorset culture emerges as these various innovations coalesce into a coherent way of life. These peoples master techniques that will remain virtually unchanged for millennia. They develop social systems that balance competing demands with elegant efficiency. They create art forms that encode both aesthetic appreciation and practical knowledge. They establish trade networks that connect communities across vast distances. They forge spiritual traditions that maintain harmony between human needs and environmental realities. The Independence, one people, ancestors of later Inuit cultures, established some of the northernmost settlements ever known, surviving on the edge of Greenland's vast ice sheet and pushing human life deeper into the polar world than ever before. They hunt musk oxen with weapons designed for creatures that can shatter human skulls with single blows, yet they thrive in landscapes where modern expeditions require massive support. Their success demonstrates the remarkable adaptability that characterizes all northern peoples, the ability to find abundance in apparent desolation, to extract life from conditions that seem designed to extinguish it. Following in their footsteps, the Sakaksh culture develops along Greenland's coasts, their settlements positioned to exploit both marine and terrestrial resources. They perfect techniques for pursuing seals through breathing holes, a skill that requires patience measured in hours and precision measured in heartbeats. Their success at this most demanding form of northern pursuit enables them to thrive in regions where other food sources prove inadequate for year-round habitation. Summer transforms the north into a realm of impossible abundance. Rivers run thick with salmon, while birds nest in colonies that darken the sky with their numbers. Berries ripen on slopes where snow recently lay meters deep. Insects emerge in clouds so dense they obscure visibility, yet they provide protein for both humans and the animals they pursue. The brief growing season concentrates resources that must sustain life through 8 months of winter, creating pressure for harvesting methods that can capture maximum benefit from minimal opportunity. Winter returns like a familiar enemy, bringing darkness that lasts for months and cold that kills exposed flesh in minutes. Ice forms thick enough to support polar bears, yet flexible enough to crack without warning. Storms arrive with winds that can tear apart the strongest shelters, while temperatures drop below the range where human physiology can function. Yet the peoples who call this realm home have learned to find comfort in its harshest manifestations, extracting warmth from sources that outsiders would never imagine, creating light where no light should exist. Food preservation methods develop that turn abundance into security. Meat frozen in permafrost remains edible for years, while fish dried in polar winds acquire flavors that fresh products cannot match. Fat rendered from seals and whales burns in lamps that provide both illumination and heat through the darkest months. Fermented fish and aged meat supply vitamins that prevent scurvy when fresh plant foods become unavailable. Storage techniques that protect provisions from scavengers ensure that successful expeditions benefit communities for months after the killing. Navigation skills reach levels that defy modern comprehension. Travelers journey hundreds of miles across apparently featureless landscapes, following routes guided by wind patterns, snow formations, and subtle variations in terrain that escape casual observation. They predict the locations of breathing holes by reading ice thickness through sound and vibration. They find their way home through blizzards that reduce visibility to arm's length, guided by internal compasses calibrated through decades of polar travel. Toolmaking becomes an art form that combines aesthetic beauty with practical perfection. Knife blades receive edges sharp enough to shave, yet tough enough to chop bone. Harpoon heads balance dozens of design requirements, from aerodynamic efficiency to structural integrity under stress. Sewing implements achieve precision that enables the creation of waterproof seams using materials that would challenge modern manufacturers. Every implement represents hours of skilled labor applied to achieve standards where failure means death. Knowledge preservation takes forms that ensure crucial information survives the death of individual carriers. Stories encode navigational data in narrative structures that make them memorable across generations. Songs preserve the locations of game territories and seasonal timing of animal migrations. Dances mimic animal behaviors that reveal opportunities and environmental changes. Children learn essential skills through games that disguise education as entertainment, while adults share wisdom through storytelling traditions that turn winter darkness into classrooms. Far to the south, civilizations rise along fertile rivers where grain agriculture supports dense populations and complex social hierarchies. Cities emerge where thousands live in proximity, unknown to northern peoples. Writing systems develop that encode human thoughts in permanent form. Bronze tools replace stone implements, while pottery revolutionizes food storage and preparation. Yet none of these innovations prove adaptable to polar conditions, leaving the northern groups to pursue their own path of development. Ice Age giants still roam these territories when the first wanderers arrive. Mammoths browse on tundra vegetation, while their thick fur provides insulation against temperatures that would kill tropical species. Cave bears hibernate in dens that humans sometimes claim for shelter. Saber-toothed cats pursue prey along forest edges where trees give way to open grassland. The extinction of these megafauna will transform northern ecosystems, but during these early millennia, they provide resources that support human populations in regions that later ages will find uninhabitable. Climate fluctuations drive constant adaptation as temperatures rise and fall across centuries and millennia. Glacial advances force communities to relocate, while retreats open new territories for exploration. Sea level changes alter coastlines and affect marine mammal populations. Shifts in precipitation patterns influence vegetation zones and animal migrations. The peoples who endure these changes demonstrate flexibility that becomes their defining characteristic. The ability to modify behavior and techniques to match environmental demands. Genetic isolation begins to shape northern populations as distance and environmental barriers limit contact with southern groups. Physical adaptations emerge that improve existence in polar conditions. Enhanced circulation that prevents frostbite. Improved fat metabolism that provides energy in cold conditions. Modified light sensitivity that functions in realms of extreme brightness or darkness. These biological changes complement cultural innovations, creating populations perfectly adapted to their harsh realm. Language families develop that reflect the cognitive patterns necessary for polar existence. Grammatical structures emphasize the relationship between human actions and natural phenomena. Vocabulary expands to include concepts unknown to temperate peoples. Oral traditions preserve information in forms that remain accessible without writing systems. The linguistic diversity that emerges across the north reflects the creative solutions that different groups develop for similar environmental challenges. As the 3rd millennium BC draws toward its close, the foundation has been laid for everything that follows. Methods have been perfected that will sustain northern peoples for millennia. Social systems have emerged that balance individual freedom with collective needs. Spiritual practices have developed that maintain harmony between human requirements and environmental realities. Trade networks have been established that connect communities across vast distances. Knowledge preservation systems have been created that ensure cultural continuity across generations. The stage is set for the emergence of the culture that will define northern life for the next 2,000 years. The pre-Dorset peoples have demonstrated that humans can not only endure, but thrive in the Earth's most challenging realm. They have created the foundation upon which later peoples will build increasingly sophisticated societies. They have proved that the North belongs to humanity as much as humanity belongs to the North. Wind carries the scent of change across frozen landscapes where shadows dance under northern lights. Somewhere beyond the horizon, new peoples gather their strength for migrations that will transform the region forever. The pre-Dorset, who track seals across shifting ice, cannot know that their ancient ways will soon give way to innovations that will revolutionize northern life. But for now, in these final centuries before change arrives like spring ice, breaking under summer sun, they perfect the arts that make human life possible in the realm of perpetual winter. Their fires burn bright against the darkness, fueled by the fat of seals and the oil of whales. Their voices rise in songs that celebrate successful expeditions and honor the spirits that guide their steps across trackless ice. Their children learn the skills that will carry them through lives measured not in years, but in seasons conquered, each winter endured, adding to the store of wisdom that will guide future generations. In this crucible of ice and wind, humanity discovers what it means to live in harmony with forces larger than human understanding. The lessons learned here, patience, flexibility, cooperation, respect for the natural world, become the foundation for all future northern cultures. The pre-Dorset peoples may not know that they are creating the template for polar civilization, but their every action contributes to a legacy that will endure for millennia. The North keeps its own time, measured not by the turning of calendar pages, but by the eternal cycle of freeze and thaw, light and darkness, abundance and scarcity. In this realm, where existence depends on reading the subtlest signs of environmental change, the pre-Dorset peoples perfect the art of living within natural rhythms rather than attempting to impose human will upon the landscape. Their success will inspire imitators for thousands of years to come, as wave after wave of newcomers discovers that the region demands not conquest but accommodation. Winter night descends once again over camps where families gather around seal oil lamps, their faces illuminated by flames that represent the triumph of human ingenuity over impossible conditions. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, storms that test the strength of every shelter, expeditions that risk death for the chance of food, journeys across ice that may crack without warning. But tonight, in the warmth of hide tents where children sleep secure in their parents' care, the future seems as endless as the polar landscape itself. The foundation has been laid, the stage is set, the story of northern peoples has begun. Moonlight transforms packed snow into a silver stage, where a masked figure dances, antler bones clicking against his chest like whispered prayers to spirits that older peoples never knew. His movements follow rhythms that echo from realms beyond the physical world, each gesture invoking powers that dwell in the spaces between earth and sky, ice and water, life and death. The year approaches 800 BC, and across the eastern reaches of the polar world, a new culture emerges, one that will master the art of existing at the very margins of possibility. The Dorset rise from the foundations laid by their predecessors, yet they bring innovations that transform polar life in ways both subtle and profound. Where earlier groups moved constantly with the seasons, these newcomers develop methods that allow them to extract maximum benefit from smaller territories. Their settlements cluster along coastlines where ice conditions create reliable access to marine bounty, while their refined approaches enable them to thrive in regions that defeated previous inhabitants. Carved bears swim through ivory dreams, their forms capturing more than mere artistic expression. These artists possess vision that penetrates beyond surface appearances to reveal the essential spirit that animates every creature. Their sculptures serve as bridges between the physical and metaphysical realms, enabling communication with forces that control the movements of animals and the formation of frozen seas. Each carving embodies prayers spoken in stone and bone, requests for assistance that transcend ordinary human capabilities. These spiritual intermediaries emerge as master craftsmen whose skills approach the supernatural. They perfect ice hunting methods that require reading the sea's frozen surface like a vast manuscript written in a language of cracks, ridges, and subtle color variations. A tracker can detect the location of a seal's breathing hole, from distances that seem impossible, guided by sounds inaudible to untrained ears and signs invisible to casual observation. Breathing holes become the focal points around which entire stalking strategies revolve. A seal must surface to breathe every 20 minutes, yet it may maintain a dozen different holes across several square miles of frozen ocean. The successful tracker learns to think like his prey, anticipating which hole will be used next based on wind direction, tidal movement, and the subtle rhythms that govern marine mammal behavior. Hours pass in absolute stillness beside a small opening in the surface, the man's harpoon poised for the split-second opportunity that will determine whether his family eats or goes hungry. Sophisticated toggle-headed harpoons represent quantum leaps in capture efficiency. Unlike the simple, pointed spears used by earlier peoples, these weapons feature detachable heads, designed to turn sideways once they penetrate their target, creating an anchor that prevents escape. The innovation requires precise engineering, the balance between shaft and head, the flexibility of the connecting line, the strength of materials that must perform reliably in sub-zero conditions. Success depends on split-second timing and years of practice that develop reflexes faster than conscious thought. Soapstone lamps illuminate homes with warm light that transforms winter darkness into cozy gathering spaces. These carefully crafted vessels burn seal oil with remarkable efficiency, their wicks fashioned from moss that regulates the flame's intensity. The lamps provide more than illumination. They become the heart of domestic life, around which families gather for meals, conversation, and the sharing of stories that preserve cultural knowledge across generations. Women tend these flames with skills passed down through maternal lines, understanding that a poorly maintained lamp can mean the difference between comfort and catastrophe. Sled runners carved from bone and antler enable transportation across terrain that would defeat wheeled vehicles. These ingenious devices distribute weight evenly across snow and frozen ground while reducing friction through careful attention to surface preparation. Runners receive coatings of slick material applied with methods that create surfaces slicker than modern synthetic materials. The sleds themselves incorporate sophisticated jointing systems that allow them to flex with uneven terrain while maintaining structural integrity under heavy loads. Settlement patterns reflect deep understanding of microenvironments that provide optimal access to seasonal bounty. These groups establish themselves on headlands and islands that offer commanding views of frozen ocean conditions while remaining accessible to both marine and terrestrial game territories. Their houses, built with stone foundations and walls lined with sod, provide insulation that enables comfortable living through months of extreme cold. Interior arrangements maximize heat retention while accommodating the social activities that maintain group cohesion during long winter nights. Helping entities inhabit tiny amulets that trackers carry as sources of supernatural assistance. These miniature sculptures represent animals whose powers can be invoked during critical moments. The patience of the polar bear, the diving ability of the seal, the keen eyesight of the falcon. Each amulet receives careful consecration through rituals that establish connection between the physical object and the metaphysical force it embodies. Shamans specialize in creating these power objects, their understanding of animal behavior combining with mystical insight to produce items of genuine efficacy. The otherworldly realm reveals itself through art forms that achieve unprecedented sophistication. Masks carved from driftwood capture the essence of supernatural beings that inhabit the spaces between ordinary categories. Neither fully human nor completely animal, these entities mediate between the physical realm and domains accessible only through shamanic journey. The masks serve as vehicles for transformation, enabling their wearers to take on the characteristics and powers of the forces they represent. Walrus and polar bear become sacred adversaries in a cosmic drama that plays out across the frozen ocean. These massive creatures possess power that dwarfs human strength, yet they provide materials essential for polar existence. Their pursuit requires not only physical courage, but otherworldly preparation that acknowledges the sacred nature of the encounter. Elaborate rituals surround the killing of these great animals, ceremonies that honor their sacrifice while ensuring that their essence will not seek revenge against the trackers who claim their lives. Entire bands mobilize for walrus expeditions that require cooperation on scales unknown to earlier peoples. These massive pinnipeds gather in herds that can include thousands of individuals, their combined weight capable of crushing frozen surfaces thick enough to support loaded sleds. Approaching such concentrations demands careful planning and flawless execution. A single mistake can trigger a stampede that destroys opportunities for entire seasons. Success provides materials that support groups through months of scarcity, while failure may mean starvation for families who depend on the expedition's outcome. Reading frozen ocean surfaces becomes an art form that combines scientific observation with intuitive understanding, developed through lifetimes of experience. These experts distinguish between dozens of different surface types, each with characteristics that affect safety, game opportunities, and travel possibilities. They recognize the sounds that indicate formation and breakup, the colors that reveal thickness and stability, the patterns that predict where leads will open and breathing holes will form. This knowledge represents accumulated wisdom that enables them to extract sustenance from an environment that appears barren and hostile to outside observation. Tool manufacturing achieves levels of refinement that will not be surpassed for millennia. Knife blades receive edges sharp enough to slice through hide without dulling, while their handles provide ergonomic efficiency that reduces fatigue during extended use. Needles carved from bird bone enable the creation of waterproof seams, using threads made from animal sinew. Every implement reflects understanding of materials science that combines empirical knowledge with practical requirements, developed through centuries of trial and refinement. Women emerge as masters of crafts that equal male tracking skills in complexity and importance. Their clothing production requires understanding of insulation principles, moisture management, and ergonomic design that enables freedom of movement in extreme conditions. A poorly fitted garment can kill its wearer through heat loss or restricted circulation, while properly crafted clothing provides comfort and protection that enables survival in conditions that would defeat modern equipment. These skills pass from mother to daughter through apprenticeships that begin in early childhood and continue throughout life. Trade networks expand to encompass territories spanning thousands of miles, connecting bands from Hudson Bay to Greenland's remote fjords. Exotic materials appear in settlements far from their sources. Labrador slate in Alaska camps, copper from the central regions reaching eastern islands. These exchange systems move more than goods. They carry innovations, stories, and genetic diversity that prevents isolated populations from stagnating. A new harpoon design, developed in one region, spreads throughout the territory within generations, while artistic styles propagate along routes that follow seasonal migrations and trading partnerships. Seasonal rounds develop that maximize utilization while minimizing energy expenditure. Spring brings groups together at ocean edges, where seals bear their young, providing opportunities for intensive pursuit that fills winter caches. Summer disperses families across inland territories where caribou graze and berries ripen. Autumn concentrates efforts on fish runs and bird migrations that provide the last fresh food before winter's onset. Each season demands different skills and strategies, creating annual cycles that govern every aspect of group life. Contact with Norse settlers in Greenland introduces the first sustained interaction between these peoples and Europeans. These encounters begin peacefully enough, with trade exchanges that benefit both groups. Norse iron shows up in ancient Inuit settlements, while walrus, ivory, and polar bear hides made their way south to European markets. Yet cultural differences create tensions that escalate into conflicts neither group fully understands. The Europeans' aggressive expansion into traditional game territories disrupts patterns of utilization that sustained these bands for centuries. Fragments of spun yarn and carved faces left behind by these early encounters hint at relationships more complex than simple trade exchanges. Some individuals apparently lived for extended periods among the opposite culture, learning languages and customs that enabled deeper communication. Norse sagas preserve accounts of encounters with indigenous folk whose descriptions match their characteristics. Some groups appear to have incorporated European technologies, and perhaps even people, into their way of life. In East Greenland, the Inuit people develop in isolation so complete that they become almost a separate species of humanity. Cut off from other groups by vast expanses of frozen ocean and mountain, they evolve unique solutions to environmental challenges that face all polar peoples. Their stalking methods, tool designs, and social arrangements reflect innovations that emerge from extreme isolation, combined with environmental pressures that test the limits of human adaptability. These Eastern folk perfect methods for surviving in conditions that defeat other groups. They develop approaches for pursuing game on unstable surfaces that form and break up with tidal movements. Their clothing incorporates design elements unknown elsewhere, while their social arrangements enable small bands to maintain viability across generations of genetic isolation. Their success demonstrates the remarkable flexibility that characterizes all this culture, the ability to find solutions for problems that seem to have no answers. Art reaches unprecedented heights of expression that combine aesthetic beauty with metaphysical power. Sculptors working in materials ranging from ivory to soapstone create figures that capture the essential nature of their subjects, while transforming them into vehicles for supernatural communication. The famous swimming bears that characterize this artistic tradition represent more than mere achievement. They embody shamanic vision that perceives the fluid boundaries between different forms of existence. Shamanic practices develop that enable practitioners to journey between worlds in search of knowledge and power needed for group welfare. These otherworldly specialists undergo training that transforms their consciousness, enabling them to communicate with animal entities, predict weather changes, and locate game when conventional tracking fails. Their journeys take them through landscapes invisible to ordinary perception, where they negotiate with forces that control the natural phenomena upon which all life depends. Ritual landscapes emerge around settlements as shamans identify locations where the boundary between worlds grows thin. Certain rocks become recognized as dwelling places of otherworldly entities, while particular formations acquire reputations as portals to metaphysical realms. These sacred sites receive regular visits from band members who leave offerings and seek guidance for difficult decisions. The accumulation of power at such locations creates networks of holy places that connect groups across vast distances. By the 8th century AD, this culture reaches its fullest expression across territories that stretch from Alaska to Greenland. Their populations achieve levels that will not be seen again for centuries, while their innovations enable comfortable living in regions that challenge modern survival methods. Their art produces masterpieces that rival anything created by contemporary civilizations, while their otherworldly practices provide frameworks for understanding that satisfy both intellectual curiosity and emotional needs. Yet even at the height of their success, subtle changes begin to affect the foundations of their existence. Climate shifts alter the formation patterns of sea surfaces that their methods require. Animal populations fluctuate in response to environmental changes that disrupt feeding cycles and migration routes. Most ominously, new peoples begin to appear from the West, groups whose innovations and social arrangements represent revolutionary advances over traditional polar approaches. Traces of interaction between these groups and the newcomers emerge in shared tool designs and housing styles, hinting at both cultural exchange and possible conflict. Settlements show signs of abandonment that suggest rapid departures rather than gradual transitions. The sophisticated culture that flourished for over a millennium begins to fragment as bands face challenges that their traditional approaches cannot resolve. The 11th century brings accelerating change that transforms the polar world beyond recognition. Groups that survived ice ages and climatic fluctuations find themselves unable to compete with innovations brought by the Thule people spreading eastward from Alaska. The gentle folk who perfected the art of existing in harmony with their environment discover that harmony provides no defense against groups whose advances enable them to extract sustenance more efficiently and support larger populations. By 1000 AD, these ancient masters fade from the historical record, like shadows dispersing before dawn. Their settlements lie abandoned while their territories fill with newcomers, whose larger boats, more efficient weapons, and different social arrangements reshape polar life completely. Some groups may have been absorbed into Thule bands, their knowledge and skills contributing to the hybrid culture that will eventually become the modern Inuit. Others may have retreated to marginal territories, where they maintained their traditional ways for generations before finally disappearing. Yet their legacy endures in ways both subtle and profound. Archaeological sites preserve evidence of their technological achievements and artistic accomplishments. Oral traditions among later peoples preserve memories of the gentle folk who preceded them. Most importantly, the Dorset demonstration that humans can thrive in the world's harshest environments provides inspiration for all subsequent northern peoples. Their story becomes a testament to the power of patient adaptation and careful observation. Where other cultures might have attempted to dominate their environment through force, the Dorset chose to understand and accommodate the natural forces that shaped their world. Their success at extracting abundance from apparent scarcity, their development of technologies that worked with, rather than against environmental constraints, their creation of social arrangements that balanced individual needs with community welfare, all provide models for sustainable living that retain relevance across millennia. Across frozen landscapes, the wind seems to remember the camps, the waiting hunters, the hands that carved visions into bone and stone. The ice remembers their footsteps, while the sea recalls their voices raised in songs that honored the spirits of the animals that sustained them. They left no written records, built no monuments of stone or metal, established no empires that span continents. Yet their influence flows through the cultural streams that nourish all subsequent northern peoples. In the end, the Dorset become the Arctic's ancient ghosts, present in memory but absent from sight, influential in spirit but vanished from flesh. Their mastery of technologies that enabled sustainable living in extreme environments provides lessons that modern civilization is only beginning to appreciate. Their understanding of ecological relationships that sustained communities for over a millennium offers insights that contemporary environmental science struggles to achieve. Their creation of art forms that combined aesthetic beauty with spiritual power demonstrates possibilities for human expression that transcend cultural boundaries. The mask lies silent now in abandoned winter houses, its carved features still bearing traces of the ceremonies that once brought spirits dancing into the world of human experience. The ivory bears swim no more through shamanic dreams, while the breathing holes where hunters waited in perfect stillness have sealed themselves beneath layers of ice accumulated across centuries. Yet somewhere in the eternal twilight that characterizes the northern world, the Dorset continue their patient existence, waiting beside holes that may yet open, carving dreams that may yet take form, dancing to rhythms that echo across time itself. Their silence speaks more eloquently than words, their absence more powerfully than presence. They remain to remind later peoples that mastery over the environment comes not through conquest, but through understanding, not through force, but through patience, not through domination, but through accommodation. In a world increasingly dominated by technologies that overwhelm rather than enhance natural processes, the Dorset example shines like starlight across the polar night, distant but eternal, faint but unwavering, a guide for all who seek to live in harmony with forces larger than human ambition. A massive umiak slices through icy waters like a knife-cutting silk, its walrus hide hull flexing with each swell, while 40 feet of vessel carries an entire family westward into legend. The boat's frame groans under the weight of possessions that represent generations of accumulated wealth, carved ivory, precious metals, tools forged with precision that earlier peoples never achieved. At the steering paddle stands a man whose eyes scan horizons with the confidence of someone who has crossed oceans, whose weathered hands guide a craft capable of surviving storms that would destroy lesser vessels. The year approaches 1000 AD, and the Thule are on the move. Behind them stretches the Alaskan coast, where their ancestors perfected advances that will revolutionize life across the polar world. Ahead lies an archipelago of islands and channels that represents the greatest migration in human history. A journey that will carry these master seafarers from the Bering Sea to the shores of Greenland in less than 2 centuries. They travel not as refugees fleeing disaster, but as conquerors armed with superior methods, larger boats, and social organizations that enable them to succeed where others merely survived. The toggling harpoon head clicks into place with mechanical precision, its bronze point gleaming in sunlight that reflects off ice floes stretching to the horizon. This single breakthrough transforms the relationship between tracker and prey, enabling the pursuit of creatures so massive that their capture requires entire crews working in perfect coordination. Unlike the simple spears that earlier peoples thrust at seals and walrus, this revolutionary tool system locks into its target with toggle heads that turn sideways once they penetrate flesh, creating anchors that no amount of struggling can dislodge. Watching the device's preparation, children learn engineering principles that combine physics with craftsmanship in ways that will not be matched until the industrial age. The shaft's length must balance throwing distance against accuracy, while its flexibility determines how much stress the tool can absorb without breaking. The connecting line requires materials that remain supple in sub-zero temperatures, yet possess tensile strength capable of restraining creatures weighing several tons. The float attached to the line must provide enough buoyancy to prevent loss, while remaining small enough not to impede the projectile's flight. Teams of dogs pull sleds across terrain, where human feet would sink hopelessly into snow, their powerful shoulders driving through drifts that would stop other forms of transportation completely. These are not the semi-wild animals that occasionally assisted earlier peoples, but carefully bred specialists whose bloodlines have been refined across generations to produce maximum strength, endurance, and intelligence. Their handlers understand genetics through practical experience rather than scientific theory, selecting breeding pairs based on performance characteristics that create dogs capable of hauling loads across distances that measure in hundreds of miles. The revolution in transportation reshapes every aspect of polar existence. Families can now carry possessions that would have been impossible burdens for pedestrian nomads. Tools become larger and more specialized since weight limitations no longer restrict their design. Food caches can be established across vast territories and revisited when needed, creating backup systems that provide security against local shortages. Most importantly, the increased mobility enables groups to follow wildlife across ranges that dwarf the territories available to footbound predecessors. Compound bows bend with sinew and antler backing that stores energy like compressed springs, launching arrows with velocities that earlier implements could never achieve. The design represents centuries of development that combined materials, science with mechanical engineering to produce tracking tools of unprecedented effectiveness. Sinew backing prevents the wood from splitting under stress, while antler tips provide knocking points that position arrows with consistent accuracy. The result is a projectile system capable of killing large game at distances that keep trackers safely away from dangerous prey. Construction of these sophisticated bows requires master craftsmen whose skills pass from father to son through apprenticeships lasting decades. Every component must be precisely calibrated. Too much sinew backing makes the bow difficult to draw. Too little provides insufficient power. The wood itself must be selected from specific tree species, harvested at particular seasons, when moisture content optimizes flexibility. Even the bowstrings require careful preparation from materials that maintain elasticity across temperature ranges spanning more than 100 degrees. They cross from Alaska through the archipelago like waves flowing through a complex channel system, their migration following routes that demonstrate intimate knowledge of ice conditions, currents, and seasonal patterns that govern travel across the polar sea. Banks Island receives its first visitors around 1100 AD, their camps appearing on beaches where Dorset outposts stood empty and abandoned. Victoria Island follows within decades as the eastward movement accelerates, carrying advances that transform every territory they enter. Baffin Island witnesses the arrival of peoples whose material culture surpasses anything the region has ever seen. Their houses rise from whalebone frameworks that tower above ground level, creating interior spaces large enough to accommodate extended families through months of continuous occupation. Their tools display craftsmanship that combines aesthetic beauty with functional perfection, while their implements enable the pursuit of game that earlier inhabitants could only dream of attempting. Within generations, every major island in the archipelago shows evidence of their presence. The push into Greenland represents the final phase of a migration that spans continents. These newcomers establish camps along coastlines where Dorset peoples lived for millennia, their archaeological signatures quickly replacing evidence of earlier occupation. Their success stems not from military conquest, but from superior methods that enable them to extract sustenance more efficiently, while supporting larger populations in territories that challenged their predecessors' survival abilities. Massive bowhead whale pursuits define group organization in ways that distinguish this society from all previous polar cultures. These operations require crews of 20 or 30 individuals working with coordination that approaches military precision. The boats alone represent investments equivalent to small fortunes. 40 feet of walrus hide stretched over driftwood frames, assembled with methods that create vessels capable of surviving encounters with creatures weighing 40 tons. Success provides sustenance that maintains entire villages through multiple seasons, while failure can mean starvation for everyone involved. The Umialik emerges as a social position unknown to earlier peoples. The boat captain, whose authority derives from demonstrated competence rather than inherited status. These leaders achieve their positions through combinations of tracking skill, organizational ability, and accumulated wealth that enable them to outfit operations, requiring massive investments of labor and materials. Their influence extends beyond individual pursuits to encompass group decisions about migration timing, camp locations, and allocation strategies that affect everyone's welfare. Whaling crews become the backbone of society, creating social bonds that transcend family relationships while establishing hierarchies based on contribution and competence. The harpoon thrower occupies the position of highest honor, his accuracy determining whether months of preparation result in success or failure. The steersman controls the boat's approach to dangerous prey, his decisions affecting the safety of everyone aboard. Even the youngest crew members perform essential functions, their alertness and quick reactions often making the difference between life and death during encounters with creatures capable of destroying boats with single blows. Seasonal movement guides life according to patterns that optimize utilization while minimizing energy expenditure and risk. Spring concentrates activities around ice edges, where whales follow leads north towards summer feeding grounds. Summer disperses families across inland territories, where caribou graze in herds numbering thousands, while berries ripen on slopes recently freed from snow. Autumn brings groups together for intensive preparation activities that fill caches with preserved food sufficient to sustain bands through months when fresh provisions become unavailable. Winter transforms camps into centers of craft innovation, where artisans work by lamplight to create tools, implements, and art objects that represent the highest achievements of polar civilization. Men carve harpoon heads from walrus ivory with precision that enables perfect balance and aerodynamic efficiency. Women sew clothing from materials ranging from bird skins to caribou hide, creating garments that provide protection against conditions that would defeat modern equipment. Children learn skills through observation and practice that prepare them for adult responsibilities, requiring life or death competence. Each region adapts these advances according to local conditions and available materials, creating variations that demonstrate the flexibility underlying their success. Alaskan groups maintain closer connections to Asian mainland influences, their material culture showing elements that distinguish them from their eastern relatives. Greenlandic bands develop specializations that reflect the unique opportunities and challenges of living at the edge of the world's largest ice sheet. Central populations create hybrid forms that combine influences from both extremes. The diversity within unity that characterizes this expansion reveals sophisticated understanding of adaptive strategies that enable success across environments ranging from temperate forests to polar deserts. Groups modify house designs to accommodate local building materials, while maintaining thermal efficiency principles that ensure comfort in sub-zero conditions. They adjust pursuit strategies to target species available in particular regions, while preserving methods that enable success across the entire range of polar fauna. They develop trade relationships that connect bands, across thousands of miles, while maintaining cultural coherence that enables communication and cooperation. By 1400, these innovators occupy nearly the entire polar rim, their settlements stretching from Alaska to Greenland in an arc that encompasses territories larger than most empires. Their population levels exceed anything achieved by previous polar peoples, while their technological sophistication enables comfortable living in environments that challenge modern survival capabilities. Their social organizations balance individual achievement with community welfare through mechanisms that prevent both autocracy and anarchy. Their spiritual practices provide frameworks for understanding that integrate practical knowledge with metaphysical insight. Multi-family houses revolutionize domestic architecture through designs that maximize heat retention while accommodating social functions requiring communal spaces. These structures incorporate engineering principles that distribute structural loads efficiently while creating interior environments suitable for activities ranging from food preparation to tool manufacturing. Whalebone frameworks provide support systems capable of bearing snow loads that would collapse lesser constructions, while skin coverings create weather barriers that exclude wind and moisture while permitting natural lighting. Interior arrangements reflect social hierarchies that balance authority with accessibility, creating living spaces where leaders can exercise necessary control while remaining integrated with community life. Sleeping platforms raised above floor level take advantage of rising warm air while providing privacy for family groups. Storage areas built into wall spaces preserve food and equipment while keeping them readily accessible. Central hearth areas accommodate cooking activities that serve multiple families while creating gathering spaces for social interaction during long winter months. The sophistication of these architectural achievements becomes apparent when compared with contemporary European building techniques. Thule engineers solve problems of insulation, ventilation, and structural stability using materials and methods that demonstrate understanding of physical principles, not formally recognized by civilized societies for centuries. Their solutions prove so effective that basic design elements persist virtually unchanged into modern times, testifying to the fundamental soundness of innovations developed through empirical experimentation rather than theoretical analysis. Iron tools begin appearing in assemblages through trade relationships that connect polar regions to temperate zones where metalworking methods produce superior cutting implements. These exchanges demonstrate the existence of communication networks spanning continents, carrying materials and ideas across cultural boundaries that might seem insurmountable to outside observation. The incorporation of metal tools into traditional systems creates hybrid approaches that combine the best elements of different cultural traditions. Meteor iron, found in natural deposits, provides raw materials for indigenous metalworking experiments that produce cutting implements superior to traditional stone alternatives. These celestial gifts appear in locations scattered across the polar world, their unique properties enabling the creation of blades and tools that maintain sharp edges under conditions that would quickly dull conventional materials. The methods developed for working this exotic material demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgy principles that enable maximum utilization of limited supplies. Trade networks carrying metal goods follow routes established for traditional exchanges, their expansion reflecting increased demand for materials that improve hunting efficiency and expand technological possibilities. Copper from sources in the central regions reaches settlements thousands of miles away, while iron objects move along coastal routes that connect communities across ocean barriers. These exchange systems create dependencies that strengthen social bonds while distributing resources that improve living standards throughout the network. Social advances parallel craft developments in creating organizations capable of managing complex operations requiring coordination among multiple bands. Whaling operations often involve cooperation between groups separated by hundreds of miles, their success depending on timing and logistics that require sophisticated planning and communication. These collaborative efforts create regional networks that transcend local tribal boundaries while maintaining cultural coherence across vast territories. Leadership structures emerge that balance authority with accountability, creating positions of power that depend on continued demonstration of competence rather than hereditary privilege. The Umialik achieves influence through success at organizing and leading operations that benefit entire groups, but this authority remains contingent on continued effectiveness. Failure to provide expected returns can result in loss of status that reduces leaders to ordinary band members with no special privileges or responsibilities. Decision-making processes incorporate consultation mechanisms that ensure group input while maintaining efficiency necessary for timely responses to opportunities and threats. Discussions continue until consensus emerges around courses of action that command broad support, but emergency situations enable experienced leaders to make rapid decisions that bands accept based on demonstrated expertise. These flexible systems provide stability during normal times while enabling quick adaptation when circumstances demand immediate responses. While supporting male roles, women maintain distinct responsibilities that grant them meaningful power within the community. Their expertise in clothing production makes them essential participants in operation planning, since inadequate gear can doom enterprises regardless of other preparations. Their knowledge of food preservation enables groups to maintain nutritional requirements during seasons when fresh provisions become unavailable. Their skills in child rearing ensure cultural continuity across generations that face radically different challenges from those their parents encountered. The integration of female perspectives into group decision-making processes reflects practical recognition that survival in polar environments requires utilization of all available human assets. Women's observations about weather patterns, animal behavior, and material availability often provide crucial information that determines operation timing and location selection. Their networks of communication with relatives in distant camps create information systems that enable coordination across regions lacking formal organizational structures. Cultural transmission mechanisms develop that ensure essential knowledge passes between generations while adapting to changing circumstances that require modified approaches to traditional challenges. Stories encode navigational information in memorable forms that enable accurate reproduction across time periods spanning decades. Songs preserve the timing of seasonal events that govern hunting and migration decisions. Dances mimic animal behaviors that reveal opportunities for successful pursuit, while strengthening social bonds that maintain community cohesion. Instruction here goes beyond the classroom, blending tradition, skill, and experience to equip learners for conditions where failure isn't an option. Children begin learning survival skills through games that disguise serious education as entertainment, gradually accepting increasing responsibilities as their competence develops. Adolescents serve apprenticeships with master craftsmen and hunters, their training continuing until they demonstrate ability to perform independently under challenging conditions. As human abilities grow through new innovations, religious practices shift to address fresh spiritual challenges, deepening the need for supernatural guidance in an increasingly complex world. Whale pursuits require ceremonies that honor the spirits of creatures whose cooperation enables human survival. Their rituals ensuring that killed animals will be reborn to provide future opportunities. Tool blessing ceremonies imbue implements with spiritual power that improves their effectiveness while protecting their users from dangers inherent in tracking activities. Shamanic traditions adapt to serve groups whose increased size and complexity create new categories of spiritual needs requiring specialized attention. These practitioners develop methods for communicating with whale spirits that control the movements of marine mammals, essential for large-scale operations. They learn to predict weather patterns that affect ice conditions, determining the safety and success of maritime ventures. They master healing approaches that address injuries and illnesses common among people engaged in dangerous activities, requiring physical strength and endurance. Artistic expression reaches new heights of sophistication as increased leisure time and accumulated wealth enable specialized craftsmen to pursue aesthetic achievements beyond simple utilitarian requirements. Ivory carvers create sculptures that combine realistic representation with stylized elements, expressing spiritual insights about the nature of animals and their relationships with human hunters. Clothing decorators develop design motifs that identify family lineages while demonstrating individual creativity and skill. Toolmakers achieve levels of functional beauty that transform utilitarian objects into works of art, worthy of preservation and admiration. This migration represents more than simple population movement. It constitutes a revolution that transforms polar civilization through advances that enable human societies to thrive in environments previously supporting only marginal existence. Their success stems from craft developments that multiply individual capabilities, social organizations that coordinate group efforts effectively, and spiritual practices that maintain harmony between human needs and environmental constraints. These achievements create the foundation for all subsequent polar cultures, while establishing patterns of adaptation that remain relevant across centuries of continued development. As the 14th century draws to a close, the descendants of these migrants have established themselves as masters of the polar world. Their camps dot coastlines from Alaska to Greenland, while their influence extends inland to territories where their tracking operations pursue caribou across vast tundra expanses. Their craft achievements enable comfortable living in conditions that challenge modern survival capabilities, while their social advances create bands that balance individual achievement with collective welfare. Their spiritual traditions provide frameworks for understanding that integrate practical knowledge with metaphysical insight, sufficient to sustain meaning across lifetimes spent in environments of extraordinary challenge and beauty. The stage is set for the emergence of the people who will become known to history as the Inuit, inheritors of Thule innovations who will face new challenges requiring continued adaptation and development. Climate changes will test their technologies, while contact with outside cultures will challenge their social organizations and spiritual traditions. Yet the foundation laid during the Great Migration provides resources sufficient to meet these challenges while maintaining cultural continuity that preserves essential elements of identity across centuries of continued change and development. In the salt air above Thule shores, where ocean life once sustained entire communities, there drifts the subtle breath of transformation. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the medieval warm period that enabled their expansion begins its slow retreat toward the Little Ice Age that will test every aspect of their civilization. Their children cannot know that the world they inherit will demand modifications to approaches that served their parents so successfully, but the tools and knowledge accumulated during centuries of innovation provide resources adequate for meeting whatever challenges the future may bring. A hunter waits beside a breathing hole in absolute stillness, his harpoon poised like a prayer frozen in time. 3 hours pass without movement, not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head, not even the whisper of breath visible in air so cold it burns the lungs. Around him stretches an ocean of ice that extends beyond the horizon, its surface marked only by the subtle ridges and pressure cracks that reveal its constant, invisible motion. When the seal finally surfaces, the moment arrives and passes like lightning. One heartbeat to recognize the dark nose breaking the surface. Another to drive the harpoon home with precision earned through decades of practice. In that instant, between waiting and striking, lies the entire philosophy of a people who have learned to extract life from the edge of existence itself. The world has entered the Little Ice Age, and temperatures drop year by year, like stones falling into dark water. Glaciers advance across landscapes that knew warmth for centuries, while sea ice forms thicker and persists longer than the oldest grandmothers can remember. For most human societies, such changes bring disaster, crop failures, famines, population collapses that topple governments and scatter peoples across continents. But for the Inuit, descendants of the great Thule migration, these climatic shifts present opportunities as well as challenges. Their ancestors spent millennia learning to read ice like a vast library, written in a language of pressure ridges, lead patterns, and seasonal formations. Now that knowledge becomes more precious than gold. Families gather in kagiks, snow-domed halls that transform winter darkness into theaters of memory and song. These ceremonial houses rise from the frozen ground like igloos on a massive scale, their interiors warmed by dozens of oil lamps until the temperature inside reaches levels that allow people to sit comfortably in light clothing, while outside the wind howls at 40 below zero. The construction requires engineering skills that combine physics with artistry, each block of snow cut and placed with precision that creates self-supporting domes capable of housing 50 or more people through celebrations that stretch for days. Inside these luminous chambers, voices rise in stories that stretch as long as the winter night itself. Master storytellers weave narratives that preserve everything from navigation routes to spiritual beliefs, their words carrying information that enables survival across generations. A single tale might encode the location of seasonal hunting grounds, the timing of animal migrations, the recognition of weather patterns, and the proper protocols for approaching supernatural forces, all wrapped in entertainment that makes essential knowledge memorable to listeners, ranging from small children to elderly grandparents. Children learn by watching with an intensity that transforms observation into education. A 5-year-old girl sits motionless for hours beside her grandmother, her small fingers following every movement, as expert hands scrape caribou hide with a precision that removes precisely the right amount of material, without creating holes that would ruin the skin's usefulness. A 7-year-old boy shadows his uncle during tool-making sessions, his eyes tracking every stroke of the knife that shapes walrus ivory into harpoon heads balanced to the 100th of an ounce. The learning process requires no formal instruction. Knowledge flows through demonstration and imitation until skills become as natural as breathing. Scylla flows through everything, the breath of life that connects wind, whale, hunter, and ice in relationships too complex for simple understanding, yet too essential for ignorance. This cosmic force animates all existence, from the movement of storms across empty tundra to the thoughts that guide a tracker's hand when he casts his harpoon at prey 20 feet away. Scylla cannot be controlled or commanded, only approached with respect and humility that acknowledges human dependence on powers far greater than individual will or cleverness. Understanding sila requires recognizing that every element of the northern world possesses consciousness and agency. The ice beneath a hunter's feet makes decisions about when to crack and where to hold firm. The seals below the surface choose whether to surface at breathing holes where hunters wait, their decisions influenced by how properly the men have prepared themselves through ritual and purification. Even tools and weapons carry awareness that affects their performance. A harpoon point that has been blessed and treated with proper respect flies true, while one that has been neglected or mishandled will miss its target regardless of the thrower's skill. Sharing partnerships bind families across hundreds of miles through ninjik relationships that ensure no one starves alone. These formal agreements create networks of mutual obligation that transcend kinship ties, establishing bonds between households that may never meet face to face, but remain connected through exchanges that balance abundance and scarcity across vast territories. When hunters in one region enjoy exceptional success with caribou, portions of their take travel along ninjik networks to coastal communities, experiencing poor seal seasons. When marine mammal hunting produces surplus oil and blubber, inland groups receive supplies that carry them through periods when terrestrial game becomes scarce. The ninjik system operates according to principles that combine practical economics with spiritual obligations, creating social insurance networks that prevent local shortages from becoming community disasters. Partners exchange gifts not merely to balance immediate needs, but to maintain relationships that span decades and connect generations through ongoing cycles of mutual support. A hunter who shares his bounty during years of plenty earns claims on assistance during seasons of want, while families that provide help to struggling relatives can expect reciprocal aid when their own circumstances turn difficult. Wife exchange and adoption serve as crucial survival mechanisms rather than simple social customs, creating kinship bonds that extend support networks beyond biological relationships. When disasters strike individual families, hunting accidents that kill primary providers, illnesses that incapacitate essential workers, environmental catastrophes that destroy local resources, these extended relationships provide alternative sources of assistance that prevent isolated tragedies from becoming group extinctions. Children who lose their parents find new families readily available, while widows and widowers gain new spouses whose skills complement their own survival requirements. The practice of spouse exchange operates within carefully regulated frameworks that balance individual desires with community needs, creating temporary partnerships that serve specific purposes while maintaining the stability of primary relationships. During whaling seasons, when crews require maximum coordination, successful hunters may exchange wives with less experienced partners, creating household arrangements that optimize domestic support for critical operations. These exchanges strengthen social bonds while distributing knowledge and skills across community networks in ways that improve everyone's capabilities. Taboo systems govern interactions between humans and animals, according to principles that function as environmental management laws, disguised as spiritual beliefs. The rules that require hunters to offer water to killed seals serve to ensure that marine mammals receive respectful treatment that encourages their spirits to be reborn for future hunting. Prohibitions against mixing land and sea animals in meals prevent spiritual conflicts that could drive away prey species essential for survival. Restrictions on hunting certain animals during specific seasons protect breeding populations while concentrating effort during periods when success rates remain highest. These regulatory systems encode centuries of empirical observation about animal behavior, population dynamics, and ecological relationships within cultural forms that ensure compliance across generations. Violations bring supernatural sanctions that manifest as hunting failures, equipment breakdowns, and community misfortunes serious enough to threaten group survival. The effectiveness of these taboo systems in maintaining sustainable hunting practices demonstrates how spiritual beliefs can serve practical conservation purposes when they evolve through long experience with environmental constraints. The 13-moon cycle governs all aspects of existence according to astronomical observations, refined across millennia of polar living. Each moon brings its own hunting opportunities, ceremonial obligations, and spiritual significance that determines community activities throughout the year. The moon, when seals breathe, marks the period when marine mammals become accessible through breathing holes in thick ice. The moon of the returning sun celebrates the end of winter darkness, with ceremonies that welcome light back to the world. The moon, when birds return, signals the beginning of seasonal migrations that bring fresh food after months of preserved provisions. These lunar calendars coordinate individual activities with group needs, while maintaining synchronization with natural cycles that determine the availability of resources essential for survival. Families plan their movements according to moon phases that indicate optimal timing for specific hunting strategies. Communities schedule ceremonies during periods when weather conditions favor large gatherings. Even daily routines follow lunar rhythms that align human activity with environmental patterns affecting everything from tidal movements to animal behavior. Consensus decision-making processes ensure that community choices reflect broad agreement while maintaining efficiency necessary for timely responses to opportunities and threats. Discussions continue until all voices have been heard and all concerns addressed. But experienced leaders guide conversations toward resolutions that command general support. Emergency situations enable respected elders to make rapid decisions that groups accept based on demonstrated wisdom, while major policy choices require extended deliberations that may span multiple seasons before reaching final agreement. The absence of formal authority structures prevents the concentration of power in ways that could lead to tyranny or exploitation, while systems of earned respect ensure that influence flows to individuals whose competence benefits everyone. Successful hunters gain authority through their ability to provide food, while skilled craftsmen achieve prominence through their capacity to create tools that improve community welfare. Women earn leadership roles through expertise in domestic technologies that keep families alive, while elders maintain influence through knowledge accumulated across decades of experience. Traditional governance operates through councils that include all adult community members, regardless of gender or social status, creating democratic participation that maximizes input while minimizing conflict. Decisions emerge through processes that seek unanimous consent rather than majority rule, ensuring that minority viewpoints receive consideration and that final choices enjoy support broad enough to guarantee implementation. These systems require patience and diplomatic skill, but they produce agreements that remain stable across long periods because they address the concerns of all affected parties. Oral tradition preserves historical knowledge in forms that remain accurate across centuries of transmission, while adapting to contemporary circumstances that require updated applications of ancient wisdom. Master storytellers undergo training that develops memory capabilities approaching photographic precision, enabling them to reproduce narratives containing thousands of details without error or omission. Their performances serve multiple functions simultaneously: entertainment that relieves the tedium of winter confinement, education that transmits essential survival information, and spiritual instruction that maintains proper relationships with supernatural forces. The stories themselves employ sophisticated literary techniques that enhance memorability while encoding multiple levels of meaning, accessible to listeners with different degrees of knowledge and experience. Surface narratives provide entertainment suitable for children, while deeper meanings reveal navigation instructions, spiritual teachings, and historical accounts that serve adult needs. The greatest storytellers master repertoires containing hundreds of tales, each preserved with perfect accuracy, yet adapted through performance techniques that make ancient wisdom relevant to contemporary circumstances. Songs preserve specific categories of knowledge that require exact reproduction to maintain their effectiveness, particularly hunting magic that depends on precise wording and musical patterns to achieve supernatural results. These vocal traditions encode everything from whale calling techniques to weather prediction methods. Their melodies and rhythms designed to facilitate accurate transmission across generations. Children learn songs before they understand their meanings, absorbing patterns that will prove essential when they begin participating in adult activities requiring supernatural assistance. By imitating animal behavior, dances not only signal where prey might be found, they also help sustain the bonds that keep groups united during months of separation. These performances serve as entertainment during dark winter nights, while preserving knowledge about prey species that helps hunters recognize behavioral patterns, indicating vulnerability to capture. The movements also provide exercise that maintains physical fitness during seasons when outdoor activity becomes limited by weather conditions too severe for safe travel. Survival in deadly cold hinges on clothing, engineered with precision, balancing layered warmth and freedom of movement for even the most physically intense activities. The layering strategies employed by Inuit seamstresses create microclimates around the body that regulate temperature through principles of heat retention and moisture management that will not be fully understood by material scientists until the 20th century. Inner garments made from bird skins provide insulation that traps body heat while allowing perspiration to escape, preventing the accumulation of moisture that would create deadly heat loss through evaporation. Middle layers, fashioned from caribou, hide offer windproof protection, while maintaining flexibility that enables full range of motion during hunting activities. Outer shells, crafted from seal or walrus hide, provide waterproof barriers that shed rain and snow, while incorporating design features that prevent heat loss through mechanical ventilation systems built into the garment construction. Every stitch serves multiple purposes, creating seams that provide structural strength while maintaining insulation integrity and allowing controlled air circulation. The techniques employed require tools that achieve precision, approaching surgical instruments, while the materials themselves demand preparation methods that optimize their performance characteristics for specific applications. A single parka represents hundreds of hours of skilled labor applied to achieve standards where failure means death for the wearer. Food becomes more than nourishment. It transforms into memory, gratitude, and lore, encoded in consumption patterns that maintain spiritual relationships while meeting nutritional requirements across seasonal cycles that alternate between abundance and scarcity. The protocols governing meal preparation and consumption serve to honor the spirits of hunted animals, while ensuring that essential nutrients remain available throughout the year. Sharing customs creates social bonds that reinforce community solidarity, while distributing resources according to principles that prioritize need over contribution. Preservation techniques enable the conversion of seasonal abundance into year-round security through methods that maintain nutritional value while preventing spoilage across months of storage in challenging environmental conditions. Meat cached in permafrost retains vitamin content that prevents scurvy during periods when fresh food becomes unavailable. Fat rendered from marine mammals provides concentrated energy that sustains heavy labor during hunting seasons when caloric requirements reach extreme levels. Fermented foods supply nutrients that complement preserved provisions, while adding variety that maintains appetite during monotonous winter months. The spiritual dimensions of food consumption require careful attention to rules that govern which animals can be eaten together, how different species must be prepared, and what portions should be offered to supernatural forces whose continued cooperation ensures future hunting success. These dining protocols serve practical purposes that extend beyond spiritual requirements. They distribute different types of nutrition according to individual needs while maintaining taboo systems that protect vulnerable animal populations from overexploitation. As the 16th century progresses, the Inuit have achieved a form of civilization that enables not merely survival, but genuine prosperity in environments that defeat most human societies. Their technologies reach levels of sophistication that will not be surpassed until the development of modern synthetic materials, while their social systems create stability and prosperity that endure across centuries of climatic challenge. Their spiritual practices provide meaning and guidance that sustain communities through hardships that would destroy groups lacking such deep cultural resources. Yet even as they perfect these ancient ways, changes stir beyond the southern horizon, like storm clouds gathering strength. Ships appear occasionally in southern waters, their crews bringing goods and stories that hint at vast civilizations whose very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of human society. The Inuit who encounter these strangers cannot know that their world stands on the threshold of transformations that will test every aspect of their carefully refined culture. For now, in these final decades before sustained contact reshapes their existence, they continue perfecting arts that make human life possible at the edge of the inhabitable world. Their fires burn bright against the darkness, fueled by oil drawn from creatures that swim beneath miles of ice. Their voices rise in songs that celebrate the successful hunt while honoring the spirits that make all life possible. Their children learn skills that connect them to landscapes and seascapes that have nurtured their ancestors through countless generations of adaptation and refinement. The ice keeps its own time, measured not in calendar years, but in the eternal rhythms of formation and breakup, abundance and scarcity, darkness and light. In this realm, where human intelligence confronts natural forces at their most extreme, the Inuit achieve synthesis between practical necessity and spiritual meaning that enables not merely survival, but fulfillment across lifetimes spent in pursuit of harmony with powers larger than human understanding. Their achievement stands as testimony to possibilities for human adaptation that transcend the limitations most cultures accept as permanent boundaries of the possible. A Norse longhouse rots on Greenland's coast, like the skeleton of some ancient sea beast, its timbers bleached white by centuries of Arctic wind. The last settlers vanished generations ago, leaving behind only stone foundations and rusted iron fragments that glint among the tundra grass. Yet Inuit families still fish these same waters, where Eric the Red once established his doomed colony, their kayaks slicing through fjords that witnessed the first failed attempt by Europeans to claim the polar realm as their own. The abandoned ruins serve as silent testimony to the land's power to defeat those who approach it without proper understanding or sufficient respect. On a summer morning in 1576, strange shapes appear on the horizon, like islands that move against the wind. Martin Frobisher's ships materialize from the morning mist, their wooden hulls dwarfing even the largest umiaks as they navigate channels where Inuit hunters pursue seals along the ice edge. The crews that emerge from these floating fortresses speak in harsh tongues that grate against ears accustomed to the flowing rhythms of Inuktitut, while their pale faces burn red under an Arctic sun that their southern blood cannot endure. They offer knives that never dull, needles that pierce the thickest hide without bending, and beads that glow with colors unknown in the natural world. In exchange for these marvels, the strangers seek walrus ivory, carved with impossible delicacy, polar bear hides that dwarf any southern fur, and whale oil that burns cleaner than any flame their own lands can produce. Initial meetings unfold with the cautious curiosity that characterizes encounters between radically different worlds, gestures substituting for shared language, gifts offered as bridges across cultural chasms, careful assessments of strength and intention that will determine whether these pale visitors become allies or enemies. Inuit observers study the newcomers with the same intensity they apply to reading ice conditions or tracking prey, noting details that reveal character and capability. The foreigners shiver in clothing designed for temperate climates, their inadequate gear marking them as children in an adult world, despite the power of their ships and weapons. They struggle with basic tasks that any Inuit adolescent masters without thought, yet they command innovations that create fire without flint and preserve food without ice. These contradictions puzzle watchers who understand that survival requires competence across all domains of existence. Through careful negotiation, exchange relationships emerge that establish protocols satisfying both groups while protecting each side's essential interests. Iron knife blades hold edges that remain sharp through months of use, transforming daily tasks that previously required constant tool maintenance. Metal needles accelerate clothing production that once consumed entire seasons, their precision enabling seam work that creates garments of unprecedented sophistication. The visitors receive polar products that command fantastic prices in southern markets, their holds filling with commodities worth more than gold to buyers who prize exotic materials from the world's edge. These commercial connections create the first systematic links between polar and temperate civilizations, establishing patterns that will persist for centuries while gradually transforming both worlds. Ships begin appearing regularly in Arctic waters, their crews learning to navigate ice-filled channels through guidance provided by Inuit pilots, whose knowledge proves essential for safe passage. Northern bands develop new dependencies that reshape their material culture, while maintaining ancestral skills necessary for independent survival when external supplies fail. Yet beneath the surface of peaceful exchange, deeper tensions simmer, like pressure building beneath winter ice. The strangers attempt to claim territories as exclusive possessions, while the people of the ice view land and sea as common heritage belonging to all living beings. These fundamental disagreements about the nature of relationships with the environment generate disputes that neither side fully comprehends, their misunderstandings festering like hidden wounds that will eventually burst into open conflict. Violence erupts when miscommunication combines with economic pressure to create situations where patience fails and weapons replace words. Warriors discover that their fighting methods prove inadequate against opponents armed with firearms and protected by metal armor, while the invaders learn that polar warfare requires skills their military training never provided. Battles fought on ice and snow favor defenders who understand terrain that confuses and defeats attackers, yet superior weaponry eventually tips the balance toward groups possessing gunpowder arms. The kidnapping of Inuit individuals by explorers creates lasting trauma that poisons relationships between cultures for generations. captives taken to display before southern courts experience displacement that destroys their ability to function in either world. Too changed by foreign exposure to readjust to home life, yet too alien for acceptance in the societies that seized them. Their stories, when they return, carry warnings about southern peoples whose customs threaten the spiritual foundations of polar existence. As the 16th century gives way to the 17th, a new kind of stranger appears in Greenlandic waters. In 1733, Moravian missionaries arrive carrying more than goods. They bring systematic attempts to transform Inuit souls, according to doctrines that challenge every aspect of spiritual understanding. These religious pioneers establish permanent settlements where they can maintain year-round contact with indigenous populations, their presence representing the first sustained challenge to ways of life that sustained ancestors through millennia of environmental trials. The missionaries accomplish something that traders and explorers never attempted. They create written forms of Inuktitut that preserve words in permanent documents rather than fleeting human memory. Their scholars develop orthographic systems that capture the sounds and meanings of polar languages, their grammatical analyses revealing complexities that surpass many southern tongues. The ability to read and write gives Arctic peoples new tools for preserving cultural knowledge, while enabling communication across distances that previously required face-to-face meetings. This literary revolution carries costs that become apparent only gradually, as written forms begin displacing oral traditions that encoded multiple layers of meaning, accessible only through performance and interpretation. Stories that once adapted to audience needs and contemporary circumstances become fixed in textual forms that resist modification, while spiritual teachings that required shamanic guidance for proper understanding become available to anyone capable of reading written words. The democratization of knowledge creates opportunities for individual learning while undermining systems of education that controlled access to dangerous or sacred information. With the gifts and good intentions comes smallpox, its invisible presence spreading through camps faster than news of its approach. Entire settlements empty as the disease claims victims who possess no immunity to pathogens unknown in polar environments, their populations collapsing in ways that disrupt social structures and cultural transmission. Families that lose their elders forfeit accumulated wisdom essential for survival, while groups that lose their skilled crafters find themselves unable to maintain capabilities necessary for independent existence. The demographic catastrophe reshapes Arctic society in ways that extend far beyond immediate mortality, forcing survivors to reorganize systems around depleted populations lacking essential skills and knowledge. Shamanic practices suffer particularly severe disruption, as spiritual specialists succumb to illnesses their healing powers cannot cure, their deaths creating crises of faith that undermine confidence in ancestral religious practices. The failure of old remedies to address foreign diseases creates openings for missionary activities that offer alternative spiritual frameworks claiming superior effectiveness. Sustained interaction with Danish colonizers gradually separates Greenlandic Inuit from their relatives across the polar world, as daily contact creates unique cultural developments that distinguish them from populations maintaining isolation. These eastern groups adopt southern innovations and customs more extensively than their western relatives, their material culture becoming hybrid forms that combine indigenous wisdom with foreign influences. Intermarriage between settlers and Inuit women produces mixed populations whose cultural identity reflects elements from both heritages. Meanwhile, metal objects that enter Arctic societies through coastal contacts spread inland along ancient pathways, reaching groups that never encounter foreigners directly yet benefit from their contributions. A knife obtained in Greenland appears eventually in Alaska camps, its journey following connections that predate outside contact by millennia, yet now carry foreign influences across continental distances. This circulation creates dependencies that extend far beyond direct interaction zones, making distant bands reliant on supply relationships they cannot control or predict. Groups that incorporate metal tools into their technological systems find themselves disadvantaged when supply interruptions force temporary returns to stone and bone implements, their skills with ancestral materials having deteriorated through disuse. The gradual replacement of indigenous methods with imported alternatives creates vulnerabilities that become apparent only when external supply systems fail, during wars or economic disruptions that affect distant manufacturing centers. Along the Labrador coast, Basque whalers establish temporary stations where they process whale oil for southern markets, their industrial operations introducing Inuit observers to methods of resource extraction that dwarf anything previously imagined. These seasonal factories demonstrate approaches to environmental exploitation that prioritize maximum short-term extraction over sustainable long-term management, their activities depleting whale populations that subsistence hunters depend on for survival. The conflict between industrial and traditional approaches to resource utilization creates tensions that foreshadow future disputes over environmental stewardship. The improvements that metal goods bring to daily life revolutionize material culture through enhancements that increase the effectiveness of ancestral methods, while enabling entirely new possibilities for craftsmanship and artistic expression. Iron-tipped harpoons penetrate thick hides more reliably than bone points, while steel knife blades enable precision carving that creates art objects of unprecedented delicacy. Copper vessels resist damage that destroys skin containers, their durability enabling more efficient food processing and storage methods that improve nutritional outcomes during challenging seasons. Yet these advantages come with costs that include not only economic dependence, but also cultural changes that alter relationships between people and their environment. Skills for making bone and stone tools begin declining as imported implements replace indigenous products, their gradual abandonment creating gaps in cultural knowledge that may prove irreplaceable if external connections fail. The spiritual relationships that connected craftsmen to materials and tools suffer disruption when foreign objects lacking proper consecration replace items created through methods that maintain harmony with supernatural forces. Disease continues spreading through polar populations in waves that follow exchange routes and seasonal gathering patterns, their impacts extending beyond immediate mortality to include social disruption that destroys support systems. Groups lose essential knowledge. Holders faster than replacement specialists can complete their training, creating gaps in cultural transmission that threaten the survival of practices necessary for independent existence. Healing traditions prove inadequate for addressing foreign pathogens, their failures undermining confidence in ancestral medicine, while creating openings for outside medical practices. The Little Ice Age intensifies during this period of contact, its cooling temperatures creating environmental challenges that complicate cultural adaptation to outside influences. Thicker ice extends hunting seasons for marine mammals, while making travel more difficult and dangerous, its effects favoring groups with strong skills over those that have become dependent on foreign innovations. Climate stress combines with disease pressure and cultural disruption to create compound challenges that test indigenous resilience in unprecedented ways. Some leaders recognize that sustained interaction with outsiders threatens ways of life that sustained their ancestors through millennia of environmental challenge, prompting them to choose isolation over engagement. These groups withdraw from coastal areas where foreign ships appear regularly, moving inland to territories where they can maintain practices without external interference. Their strategy of cultural preservation through geographical separation enables them to maintain independent existence while avoiding the complications that contact brings to their relatives. Other bands pursue selective adoption strategies that incorporate useful outside innovations while rejecting changes that threaten essential cultural values. Their careful approach enabling them to benefit from foreign contact without losing their fundamental identity. These groups develop protocols for managing relationships that protect authority structures while enabling access to beneficial materials and knowledge. Their success at maintaining cultural autonomy while engaging with foreign influences demonstrates capabilities for adaptive change that preserves essential continuities. In some regions, religious syncretism emerges where missionary activity encounters spiritual practices, their interaction producing hybrid belief systems that combine elements from both traditions in novel configurations. Converts often interpret teachings through indigenous conceptual frameworks that give familiar meanings to foreign doctrines, their adaptations creating religious practices that satisfy missionary requirements while maintaining functions. These synthetic traditions enable cultural continuity during periods of intense pressure for religious conversion. The ice itself provides protection for most groups from sustained outside contact, its barriers creating natural defenses that limit foreign penetration to coastal areas, accessible during brief summer seasons. Interior regions remain largely isolated from outside influence, their populations maintaining practices with minimal disruption, while benefiting from goods that filter inland through established exchange networks. The geographical advantages provided by polar environments enable selective engagement with foreign influences rather than wholesale cultural transformation. As the 17th century progresses, patterns of contact and isolation create a complex mosaic of indigenous responses to outside presence that range from complete maintenance to extensive cultural hybridization. Some groups develop into intermediaries who facilitate exchange between foreigners and more isolated bands, their cultural bilingualism enabling them to function effectively in both worlds while maintaining distinct identities. Others specialize in producing items for southern markets while preserving ancestral methods for domestic use, their economic strategies enabling them to benefit from outside contact without losing essential cultural capabilities. Tales spread among Arctic peoples about gods with white faces who command vessels larger than whales and possess tools that never break or dull. These stories carry both wonder and warning, their narratives encoding indigenous assessments of foreign character and capability that guide responses to outside contact. The oral tradition that preserves these accounts serves to prepare listeners for encounters they may never experience directly, while maintaining cultural frameworks for interpreting outside behavior according to indigenous values and expectations. Accounts of Inuit capabilities begin circulating in southern societies, where they create images of polar peoples that combine accurate observations with cultural misconceptions that reflect biases and limitations. These descriptions influence government policies and commercial strategies that shape the future development of polar colonization, their impacts extending far beyond immediate contact zones to affect indigenous peoples who have never encountered outsiders directly. The power of representation to influence material reality demonstrates how cultural contact operates through ideas as well as physical interaction. Across these shifting territories, the air holds the scent of change, where ancestral lifeways brush up against outside forces, offering both risk and reward. The ice remembers other changes that tested human adaptability, its frozen memory holding lessons that may guide groups through transitions that challenge everything their ancestors took for granted. Yet the foundation, laid through millennia of successful adaptation, provides resources adequate for meeting whatever challenges the future may bring, as long as essential cultural knowledge survives the changes that outside contact makes inevitable. The Little Ice Age tightens its grip like a giant's fist closing around the polar world, each winter bringing thicker ice that forms earlier and persists longer than the oldest grandmothers can remember. Glaciers creep down from mountain heights like slow-moving rivers of stone and snow, their advanced swallowing hunting grounds that fed families for generations. What began as gradual cooling has become relentless assault, transforming landscapes that once provided abundance into frozen wastelands, where existence demands every ounce of accumulated wisdom and inherited skill. In winter camps scattered across the vast Arctic, families wait weeks for the sun to rise again, a pale flame that barely clears the southern horizon before disappearing back into endless night. The darkness stretches longer each year, while temperatures plunge to depths that crack trees like gunshots and turn exhaled breath into ice crystals that tinkle like broken glass when they hit the ground. Yet inside snow houses, where seal oil lamps burn with steady flames, children learn the songs and stories that have carried their people through countless winters, their voices weaving threads of memory that connect them to ancestors who faced similar trials and prevailed. Seal pursuit grows desperate as changing ice disrupts patterns that guided hunters for millennia. Breathing holes that once appeared in predictable locations now shift with movements that follow new rhythms, forcing trackers to develop fresh strategies for locating prey, whose behavior adapts to change faster than human understanding can follow. The patient vigil beside a breathing hole may stretch for entire days without success, testing endurance and faith while families wait for meat that determines whether they will see another sunrise. Old men who remember warmer times share wisdom about ice formations their grandsons have never seen, their words carrying warnings about dangers that multiply when familiar patterns disappear. They speak of leads that opened like highways across the frozen sea, enabling travel between distant camps that now remain isolated for months at a stretch. Their memories preserve navigation methods for reading formations that no longer exist, yet these elders adapt their understanding to new realities, teaching young hunters to recognize subtle signs that reveal safe routes through increasingly treacherous terrain. Caribou herds shift their migration routes like rivers changing course after spring floods, following paths that lead away from settlements positioned to intercept them along ancestral highways. Hunters who spent lifetimes learning the timing and direction of these movements find their knowledge obsolete, their carefully planned ambushes yielding empty hands, while the great herds thunder across distant tundra beyond the reach of desperate pursuit. The failure of these massive migrations to follow expected patterns creates shortages that ripple through entire regions, forcing bands to abandon territories their ancestors occupied for generations. Innovative pursuit methods emerge as necessity drives experimentation with approaches that earlier generations would have considered desperate or foolish. Hunters learn to construct ice fishing systems that enable year-round access to fish populations that swim beneath thickening surface layers. Their approaches involving tools and strategies developed through trial and error that claims lives along with victories. The modification of ancestral harpoons creates weapons capable of penetrating ice formations that would have defeated conventional equipment, while new sled designs enable travel across surfaces that combine the worst characteristics of both snow and solid ice. Modified tools appear in camps where craftsmen work by lamplight to solve problems their fathers never faced, their innovations reflecting understanding that adaptation must proceed faster than change or entire populations will perish. Harpoon lines receive additional length to reach seals through breathing holes that extend deeper into thickening ice formations. Kayak designs incorporate strengthening modifications that enable them to withstand impacts with ice fragments that would destroy ancestral hulls. Even clothing receives alterations that provide additional insulation against temperatures that exceed the tolerance ranges for which inherited garments were designed. The merging of bands becomes common as depleted populations combine resources and wisdom to endure trials that overwhelm individual families operating in isolation. Households that lose essential members through accidents or disease join relatives whose own numbers have fallen below viable levels, their unions creating hybrid arrangements that blend customs from different regions while maintaining core cultural elements. These consolidations require diplomatic skills that balance competing customs and authority structures, yet they enable continuation for people who would otherwise face extinction through demographic collapse. Women assume increased responsibilities as the harsh climate claims disproportionate numbers of male hunters, their roles expanding to include activities previously restricted to men while maintaining domestic functions essential for group existence. They learn to set nets under ice formations that require technical skills as complex as any pursuit method, while their knowledge of food preservation becomes critical for maintaining nutrition when conventional hunting produces inadequate results. The flexibility of gender roles enables bands to utilize all available human resources during periods when rigid adherence to conventional divisions would mean death for everyone. Storage innovations develop that enable settlements to preserve larger quantities of food across longer periods, their methods reflecting understanding that abundance may not return for seasons or even years. Underground caches receive improvements that protect provisions from temperature fluctuations that could spoil stored meat or cause containers to crack and leak. New preservation approaches extend the useful life of familiar foods while maintaining nutritional value essential for enduring extended periods of scarcity. The psychology of hoarding conflicts with ancestral sharing customs, creating social tensions that require careful management to prevent fragmentation. As isolated groups face distinct challenges, regional differences grow, each community crafting its own solutions, born from the urgency of survival. Western settlements modify their housing designs to accommodate fuel shortages that make inherited heating methods unsustainable, while Eastern bands develop specialized clothing approaches that provide additional protection against wind patterns that intensify with changing climate. Central peoples create hybrid tools that combine elements from different heritages, their synthetic approaches enabling them to exploit resources that single heritage methods cannot access effectively. Exchange relationships become more important than ever, as families recognize that continuation may depend on maintaining connections with distant relatives that possess resources unavailable locally. Yet the same ice that creates desperate need also prevents reliable transportation between regions. Messengers who attempt to maintain communication networks face journeys that require weeks of travel across terrain, where a single navigation error can prove fatal. The successful completion of these missions requires skills that approach the superhuman, while their failure can isolate settlements during periods when external assistance represents the difference between continuation and extinction. Cut off from outside influence, some communities double down on tradition, guarding their customs against change and favoring what's familiar over what's new. Storytelling receives increased emphasis as bands recognize that knowledge preservation becomes critical when the carriers of inherited wisdom face higher mortality rates due to stress. Ceremonial observances expand to include new rituals designed to address spiritual needs created by unprecedented trials, while maintaining ancestral observances that connect people to sources of supernatural assistance. Cultural preservation activities intensify as populations recognize that pressure threatens not only immediate continuation, but also the transmission of wisdom essential for long-term cultural continuity. Master craftsmen take additional apprentices to ensure that essential skills endure, even if individual teachers succumb to harsh realities, while spiritual leaders share understanding that previously passed between generations through more gradual and selective processes. The democratization of certain forms of inherited wisdom reflects recognition that cultural continuation requires broader distribution of essential capabilities among population segments that may face sudden demographic collapse. Western and Eastern Arctic populations develop along increasingly different paths, as geographical barriers and local adaptations create variations in material culture and social organization that distinguish regional peoples more sharply than pressure has done for centuries. Pacific coast settlements maintain better access to resources that interior families cannot obtain, while Atlantic populations develop specialized approaches for exploiting marine resources that remain available despite changing ice. These regional differences create the foundation for cultural divergences that will persist long after circumstances stabilize. Once open routes grow treacherous and communication across vast regions becomes rare, left to the few who still have the knowledge and nerve to make the journey. The continental network of cultural exchange that characterized earlier periods fragments into regional systems that operate with minimal contact between major zones, their isolation creating circumstances for independent cultural development that may produce permanent divisions within what was once a coherent cultural complex. Stories and methods that once spread rapidly across vast distances now remain confined to local areas, where they may evolve in directions that make future cultural reunification difficult or impossible. By the 1780s, the demographic and climatic stresses reach levels that test the limits of human adaptability, forcing settlements to make choices between cultural preservation and biological continuation that earlier generations never faced. Some populations maintain ancestral ways regardless of cost, their commitment to inherited methods enabling cultural continuity at the price of reduced numbers and restricted territorial range. Others adopt whatever innovations seem necessary for immediate continuation, their pragmatic approach enabling population maintenance at the cost of cultural heritage that may prove irreplaceable once lost. The psychological effects of sustained stress begin manifesting in ways that affect cohesion and decision-making processes, as constant uncertainty about food security and shelter adequacy creates chronic anxiety that influences social relationships and spiritual observance. Inherited leadership systems face opposition from individuals who argue for radical departures from ancestral ways, while conservative elements resist changes that they view as threats to cultural identity. These internal conflicts consume energy that settlements can ill afford to waste, while external circumstances demand unity and cooperation for continuation. Spiritual observance evolves to address new categories of supernatural danger, created by circumstances that exceed the range of inherited religious understanding, as shamans develop approaches for dealing with spirits and forces that ancestral practitioners never encountered. The failure of inherited ceremonies to prevent deterioration creates crises of faith that undermine confidence in spiritual authorities, while the success of innovative ritual approaches establishes new forms of religious authority that may confront inherited hierarchies. The theological implications of change force settlements to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the relationship between human behavior and natural phenomena. Contact with outside peoples becomes increasingly rare as barriers grow more formidable, while simultaneously making such contact more desperately needed, creating paradoxes that settlements struggle to resolve through diplomatic and logistical innovations. The few traders and explorers who penetrate Arctic regions during this period encounter populations whose priorities have shifted away from exchange relationships toward pure continuation strategies, their interactions reflecting the changed circumstances that make inherited forms of cultural contact less relevant to immediate needs. As resources grow scarce, traditional food-sharing practices must adapt. Ancestral generosity gives way to new rules that protect both individuals and the group as a whole. The spiritual dimensions of sharing relationships face tests when conventional reciprocity becomes impossible due to widespread scarcity, requiring religious innovation that maintains supernatural relationships while accommodating practical necessities. As the century draws toward its close, the Inuit have demonstrated resilience that enables not merely continuation, but ongoing cultural development under circumstances that would destroy less adaptable societies. Their success stems from flexibility that permits rapid innovation while maintaining essential cultural functions, combined with inherited wisdom systems that provide frameworks for understanding change as part of natural cycles rather than unprecedented catastrophe. Stars wheel overhead in patterns that remain constant while everything else changes, their ancient light providing navigation reference points that enable travel even when familiar landmarks disappear beneath advancing ice. In snow houses, where families gather around flickering flames, the same stories that guided their ancestors through previous crises continue to provide hope and direction for people whose adaptability transforms crisis into opportunity for cultural development and innovation that will serve them through generations yet to come. In the 1800s, whalers return with harpoons of steel and ships that crush ice like eggshells beneath iron-reinforced hulls, their vessels dwarfing the largest umiaks as they navigate channels that once belonged exclusively to the Inuit. Steam engines belch black smoke into pristine polar air, while crews wielding industrial weapons pursue whales with efficiency that transforms hunting from spiritual communion into mechanical slaughter. Some of these intruders find welcome among coastal families who benefit from trade that brings unprecedented wealth, while others vanish into the ice without trace, their bones joining those of countless explorers who underestimated the region's power to humble human arrogance. The Hudson's Bay Company pushes northward like an empire, expanding its borders, establishing trading posts that serve as beacons, drawing Inuit families away from seasonal camps toward permanent settlements clustered around sources of foreign goods. These commercial outposts transform polar economics from subsistence patterns based on immediate need into market relationships that value certain products above others, creating new forms of wealth and poverty among peoples who previously shared resources according to principles that prevented extreme inequality. Families that control access to valuable furs accumulate possessions their ancestors never imagined, while those lacking marketable products find themselves dependent on charity that challenges ancestral concepts of dignity and independence. Systematic fur trading begins to change the economy as agents penetrate regions previously untouched by commercial exploitation, their presence introducing concepts of property ownership and individual accumulation that conflict with inherited sharing systems. Trap lines become territories defended against neighbors who once moved freely across landscapes viewed as common heritage, while competition for valuable fur-bearing animals creates tensions that strain social bonds built on cooperation and mutual support. The transformation from gift economy to market economy proceeds gradually yet inexorably, each transaction establishing precedents that erode foundations of ancestral social organization. American whaling fleets arrive like floating cities, their massive operations reducing whale populations that sustained Inuit bands for millennia, while offering wage labor opportunities that draw young men away from inherited pursuits toward industrial employment. These factory ships demonstrate resource extraction on scales that dwarf anything indigenous peoples ever attempted, their efficiency achieving in single seasons what ancestral hunting required decades to accomplish. The depletion of marine mammal populations disrupts ecological relationships that enabled sustainable harvesting, forcing hunters to modify strategies developed across centuries of careful observation and respectful interaction with prey species. In 1845, Sir John Franklin leads his expedition into the Northwest Passage, with confidence born of technological superiority and ignorance of polar realities that will doom his men to deaths that proper guidance could have prevented. His ships carry supplies sufficient for 3 years, yet lack the understanding necessary for extracting additional resources from environments that appear barren to untrained eyes. When Inuit hunters encounter the starving remnants of this doomed expedition, they offer assistance based on customs that require aid to travelers in distress. Yet barriers prevent effective communication of survival methods that could save foreign lives. Inuit wisdom could have preserved Franklin's entire expedition through understanding accumulated across millennia of polar existence. Their expertise encompassing everything from ice navigation to emergency food procurement in environments where outsiders see only frozen wasteland. The ability to read weather patterns in cloud formations, to locate breathing holes through subtle signs invisible to foreign eyes, to construct shelters from available materials using methods that ensure warmth and safety. All this understanding remains inaccessible to explorers, whose pride prevents them from acknowledging indigenous superiority in polar survival. The tragedy that unfolds demonstrates the fatal consequences of arrogance that values theoretical learning above practical experience earned through generations of environmental challenge. Government expeditions begin mapping the region with scientific precision that reduces landscapes of spiritual significance to coordinates on charts designed for administrative convenience rather than indigenous understanding. These surveys treat territory as empty space awaiting development rather than homeland, supporting peoples whose relationships with land encompass dimensions that foreign concepts of ownership cannot comprehend. The imposition of boundaries drawn on distant maps creates legal frameworks that ignore indigenous territorial systems based on seasonal usage patterns and spiritual connections that transcend simple possession. Shore-based whaling stations transform ancestral seasonal rhythms, as permanent installations require year-round maintenance that prevents families from following migration patterns essential for accessing diverse resources across annual cycles. Some Inuit men find employment at these facilities, their first experience with wage labor, introducing concepts of scheduled work that conflict with inherited patterns based on environmental opportunities rather than mechanical time. The money earned through industrial employment enables purchase of manufactured goods that improve certain aspects of daily life, while creating dependencies on external supply systems vulnerable to disruption. Exchange flows in multiple directions as prolonged contact enables mutual learning that benefits both indigenous and foreign participants. Yet power imbalances ensure that outside influences generally overwhelm ancestral patterns rather than achieving genuine synthesis. Inuit families adopt metal tools, firearms, and manufactured clothing that enhance their capabilities while gradually displacing inherited crafts that maintained connections to ancestral practices. Outsiders learn navigation methods and survival strategies that enable polar travel, yet they rarely acknowledge the indigenous sources of understanding that makes their expeditions possible. Some Inuit groups work for wages for the first time, their labor supporting industrial operations that extract wealth from polar resources, while providing minimal compensation to indigenous workers whose understanding makes such extraction possible. The introduction of wage labor creates new social hierarchies based on employment opportunities, rather than inherited measures of competence and contribution, while monetary ties begin replacing reciprocal obligations that sustained bands through cycles of abundance and scarcity. These economic changes proceed slowly yet inexorably, each transaction establishing precedents that transform social bonds in ways that may prove irreversible. Elders who remember the old ways speak of stars that guide travelers across trackless ice, of songs that call seals to breathing holes, of rules governing relationships with spirits that control weather and wildlife. Their voices carry wisdom accumulated across lifetimes of observation and experience, yet younger generations find ancestral understanding less relevant to lives increasingly shaped by foreign influences and opportunities. The erosion of inherited authority occurs gradually as innovations and economic opportunities create alternatives to ancestral ways that offer immediate advantages while threatening long-term continuity. The drumbeat still echoes across winter camps, where families gather to share stories and strengthen social bonds that maintain group cohesion. Yet the rhythm competes with sounds of industrial machinery and steam engines that herald the arrival of modernity in polar regions. Snow houses continue to provide shelter that enables survival in circumstances that defeat foreign architecture, while seal oil lamps burn with flames that transform darkness into spaces of warmth and human connection. These inherited methods persist because they work, their effectiveness proven through millennia of use under circumstances that challenge human adaptability. The seal oil flame flickers in the wind of change, its light illuminating faces that reflect both continuity and transformation, as Inuit families navigate between ancestral customs and modern opportunities. The lamp itself represents methods perfected across generations of experimentation and refinement, its simple design achieving efficiency that industrial alternatives cannot match in polar circumstances. Yet the oil that feeds these flames comes increasingly from trade, rather than inherited hunting that maintained spiritual connections between bands and the marine mammals that sustain them. Even as rumors spread of governments drawing lines on maps and establishing sovereignty over territories that indigenous peoples never considered ownable, the region keeps its own time, measured by seasonal cycles that ignore political boundaries. Ice forms and breaks according to patterns that predate human presence, while animal migrations follow routes established across evolutionary timescales that dwarf the brief span of colonial ambition. The fundamental rhythms that govern polar existence continue operating regardless of political changes that may reshape legal frameworks, yet cannot alter the environmental realities that determine survival. Signs of major transformation appear on horizons where smoke plumes mark the approach of steamships that can force passages through ice that sailing vessels could never penetrate, their mechanical power enabling year-round access to regions previously isolated by seasonal barriers. These advances herald changes that will reshape every aspect of polar existence, yet their full implications remain hidden from peoples whose experience provides no framework for understanding the scale of disruption that industrial civilization will bring to inherited ways of life. Talk of governments establishing permanent presence in polar regions reaches bands through traders and missionaries who serve as advance agents of colonial expansion, their activities preparing foundations for administrative systems that will impose foreign legal frameworks on indigenous territories. Schools and medical facilities appear in some locations, their services offering benefits that come with requirements for accommodation that may eventually undermine ancestral practices. The choice between modern advantages and inherited independence becomes increasingly urgent as opportunities for preservation through isolation diminish. Permanent settlements begin appearing, where temporary trading posts once provided seasonal contact, their presence creating nodes of foreign influence that gradually expand through surrounding territories. These population centers become magnets that draw indigenous families away from ancestral camps toward concentrated locations where access to manufactured goods and wage employment opportunities outweighs the costs of abandoning seasonal migration patterns. The transformation from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles proceeds through individual family decisions that collectively reshape entire systems. The economic integration of polar regions into global markets accelerates as transportation improvements enable efficient movement of valuable resources toward manufacturing centers, while returning manufactured goods that displace inherited products. This integration creates prosperity for some indigenous participants, while marginalizing others who lack access to profitable resources or marketable skills. The uneven distribution of benefits from market participation creates new forms of inequality that challenge inherited systems designed to prevent extreme disparities in wealth and social status. Churches appear in settlements where missionaries establish permanent residence, their presence introducing religious alternatives to ancestral spiritual practices, while providing social services that demonstrate practical benefits of accommodation. Some Inuit families embrace Christianity as a supplement to inherited beliefs rather than a replacement, their syncretic approach creating hybrid religious systems that maintain ancestral spiritual functions while satisfying missionary requirements. Others experience conversion as liberation from inherited restrictions, their adoption of Christian practices reflecting genuine spiritual transformation rather than mere accommodation. Young people who receive foreign education return to their bands with understanding and perspectives that enable participation in modern economic opportunities, while potentially alienating them from inherited ways that no longer provide adequate preparation for changing circumstances. These intermediaries often struggle with identity conflicts that reflect the broader challenges facing groups caught between inherited and modern worlds, their personal experiences embodying the collective dilemmas that will define indigenous responses to accelerating change. As the 19th century draws toward its close, the foundations have been laid for transformations that will reshape polar existence more dramatically than any changes since the original Thule migration. The Inuit have demonstrated remarkable adaptability in incorporating useful innovations while preserving essential functions. Yet the scale and speed of approaching changes will test their flexibility beyond anything their ancestors experienced. Their success in maintaining identity while engaging with modern opportunities will determine whether inherited understanding survives to guide future generations through challenges that exceed current imagination. The aurora borealis dances overhead in patterns that connect present observers to ancestors who watched the same lights flicker across star-filled skies, its ancient rhythms providing continuity that transcends the temporary disruptions of change. In snow houses where families still gather around seal oil lamps, children learn stories that encode wisdom earned through millennia of polar existence. The education preparing them for futures that may require both inherited understanding and modern skills. The ice remembers all who walked its surface, while the wind carries voices that speak of adaptation and endurance across generations of challenge and change that forged the Inuit into masters of the world's most demanding environment.